They are not faceless names on the wall. These belong to our fellow sons of Notre Dame who were killed in Vietnam.
You know, if you're a normal 25-year-old, you don't expect to lose your friends.
Their Notre Dame classmates paint an indelible picture for us of who they really were and likely could have been had they not sacrificed it all in service to their country.
I still wear his bracelet much as I can.
Before they were soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, they sang with the Glee Club, played rugby, worked in the dining hall, and pulled off a few pranks.
We were going to go over to St. Mary's and sneak into the dorms. Of course, Duke was like, let's do this.
I'm Mike Saray, Vietnam veteran and class of '69. Join us for this Memorial Day celebration of lives well lived, but cut way too short for God, country, and Notre Dame. Bruce Duke Heskett, class of '68, was an Army First Lieutenant. On June 28, 1970, his tank unit was attacked several times in Quang Tri Province, near the DMZ. He died of his wounds the next day and was awarded a Purple Heart. He's buried in his hometown of Spokane, Washington. Bob Noonan, welcome. Tell me about our mutual friend, Bruce, a.k.a. the Duke Heskett.
Well, I met Bruce, it was his junior year when I met Bruce, and through ROTC, and then we had friends played in rugby, and he was a member of the rugby team, of course, ROTC. And then senior year, we decided to room together. We lived off campus in a house out by the airport, and we became very good friends especially during that last year when we lived together.
And of course, everybody on the rugby team knew him very well as both an athlete and kind of the class clown.
Yeah, no, he was a good athlete. Played sports in high school. Was a very tall guy, about 6'4". Very long legs, long arms. So he would play in the scrum, in the second row in the scrum. But he was funny. He was one of the most spontaneous guys I ever met in my life. I mean, if there was an opportunity for something funny to happen, he was in the middle of it, probably leading it. But always respectful of people. I mean, everybody liked him. You kind of gravitated towards the guy because you just knew he was a good guy and you were going to have some fun every time he showed up. And we did. We had a lot of fun.
And one thing we had in common was I inherited his car, the 49 Studebaker. The classic British racing tan Studebaker. And I think you talk about spontaneous. I think I bought it for a 6-pack of beer from him.
You know, he was synonymous with the Baker, Duke and the Baker. And he would drive groups of us around. Sometimes he would take guys out on dates, even though he was engaged to be married his senior year. So he didn't date, but he would drive people on dates. He'd chauffeur everybody in the Baker. We'd put 8, 9 people in the back of that thing, and he'd drive everywhere with it, and just was a lot of fun.
So Bob, Duke had a little bit of a craziness to him as well.
Yeah, he did. One great story is one night a bunch of seniors at Notre Dame decided we were going to go over to St. Mary's and sneak into the dorms. Now, I don't know who thought of this or why we thought it was a good idea, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Of course, Duke was like, let's do this. So we drove over to the St. Mary's campus. We parked the Studebaker, and a bunch of guys, we went around to one side of the building, and guys started going up a drain pipe. Well, unfortunately, I forget how many guys got up the drain pipe, 4 or 5, and then the drain pipe fell away from the building, and one of our classmates fell into the bushes.
He was with Army ROTC. Mm-hmm. What do you think was behind that decision?
Well, he had a brother that had been in the Air Force. I think his dad had served. He had an uncle that died on D-Day. And I think he felt, like some of the rest of us, that it wasn't necessarily we were pro-war, but, you know, the responsibility to serve. And because I think our parents had served, uncles, brothers had served, and he felt it was his responsibility. And in fact, he volunteered after he got out of armor school and was at Fort Lewis, Washington. He went to his wife and he said, I'm volunteering to go to Vietnam, because he felt he had lived a great life. He'd been privileged, so to speak, and that others, the draftees and stuff, maybe they didn't have the breaks that he had and not had the good fortunes that he'd had with school and the upbringing. They were getting ready to go back their second and third time to Vietnam. He just felt it's not right that they go, I should go too. I've had this good life and let me go see what this war is all about. And he did.
How closely connected were you to Duke while he was in Vietnam?
I think we exchanged a couple of letters, that was all.
A sense of what he was experiencing over there, and how so?
I think I saw his letters. He was getting into action. Now, he's always self-effacing, so you have to read between the lines. But subsequently, and after he died, I saw some pictures, and it was very apparent to me that he was in the middle of a lot of action. He was, I won't say troubled by it, but it was something, you get that like 50-click stare where all of a sudden you're sad. You can see it in the eyes of guys that have been through a lot. And I know that he wrote a lot of letters back to his wife. He never saw his daughter.
Never saw his daughter.
Never saw his daughter. He was coming back for mid-tour leave, and that's when he was going to see his daughter.
I guess Duke's greatest legacy is that if you mention his name, you automatically get a smile on your face.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. And I think, that we all could have that. What's the old story? I mean, it's how do people feel when you're no longer in their presence? And I'm like you. Every time I talk to other people about him, old classmates, we just start laughing. And we miss him. I still miss him to this day. He was just a great guy to be around with. You just felt better by being with him. And I think that's his legacy. You just felt good being with him.
Bob Noonan, thank you for your tribute to Bruce Duke Heskett.
Glad to do it.
Jody Adrian, class of 64, was an Air Force first lieutenant. On March 12, 1967, his F-100 Thunderbird jet disappeared shortly after taking off on a mission from Tuiwa Air Base. He was declared missing in action, and his remains have yet to be found.
John Gillum, class of 64, welcome. And tell me how you are connected with Joe Adrian.
Well, I knew him as long as I can remember. We were in the same parish, and our mothers were pretty close. He went to Catholic schools, I went to public schools, but after school, there was a little herd of kids who ran around together.
Now, I heard you had a very adventurous childhood, one that he barely survived.
There was a day when he decided, we were up on top of a shed for reasons unknown, and he saw what he thought was a hanging vine and ran off the edge of the roof, grabbed the vine, which in truth was a 440 volt power line. And luckily his momentum carried him off the power line, and he survived with blistered hands and a trip to the emergency room.
So Joe introduced you to your wife.
Yes. He introduced me to my wife.
He lived at Breen Phillips, and I also heard he was a pretty industrious guy working in the North Dining Hall.
Yeah, he was a dishwasher, or as we say, a pearl diver. And, because he was a self-starter and resourceful, and my role was to fill in his shifts when he either didn't feel like it or he had other commitments. And I was an experienced pearl diver from Boy Scout camp, so it was a good fit.
He joined Air Force ROTC, which many people did in the 60s, many for getting scholarships or to get tuition grants and whatever. What was Joe's primary motivation for going into ROTC?
Joe, from as long as I knew him, wanted to be a jet fighter pilot. That was his goal. I never heard him explore any other career profile. So he would have gone into Force ROTC despite the scholarships or whatever perks there were. He was just fixated on becoming a jet fighter pilot, not a transport pilot, not any other kind of pilot, but a fighter pilot.
And he ended up flying probably the hottest jet at the time, the F-100 Thunderbird. And I heard that he went through the Air Force Top Gun School and was so good that he was assigned to train NATO pilots in Turkey. But that apparently wasn't good enough for him.
He appealed his assignment to Turkey, got a combat assignment in Vietnam.
How did you hear of Joe, or as you knew him, Jody's death?
And I can't remember who made the call, whether it was my parents or his siblings, but I do remember sitting on the edge of our bed, just stunned. If you're a normal 25-year-old, you don't expect to lose your friends. That's how we learned, and it was like the proverbial gut punch. It literally took my breath away.
John, given the fact that Joe's body was never recovered, and to this day he's still listed as MIA, have you ever gotten any closure on your friend's death?
No. After his death, I used to have dreams that he would walk in the door, and it turned out it was all a big mistake, and he was camping out somewhere in Cambodia or some other far-fetched, very real, vivid dream.
All families take the death of a child very, very hard. But you're saying his family took it particularly hard and it really consumed the rest of their lives?
Yes, they never got out from under. Joe's father took the death settlement that the armed services give parents or next of kin. He spent it on renting planes and flying around over Wayne County, Pennsylvania, communing with himself and with his lost son.
John, how do the people of your hometown, River Edge, New Jersey, remember Joe?
There's a street in River Edge called Adrian Way.
John, is there any particular literature or poetry that helps you kind of reflect on the loss of your friend Joe?
So there's a piece of poetry that I keep in mind when I think about Joe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
And John, we will remember your friend Joe. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe.
James Jimmy Egan Jr., class of 64, was a Marine Corps first lieutenant. On January 21st, 1966, his 14-man reconnaissance team was ambushed near the DMZ. He disappeared, along with another Marine, who was later reported to have died in captivity. Jimmy Egan is still reported as missing in action. John Lally in New Jersey. Tell me about your friend, Jim Egan.
Jim was a very special person. We met our first day at Notre Dame. We met at the circle as we unpacked our bags. And we hit it off right away. He was from nearby New Jersey. I was from nearby Westchester County, New York. And we had the same interests. So we kept meeting again that first week and second week during all the orientation meetings. He was interested in music, and so was I. So that orientation about University Theater, about the Notre Dame Glee Club, about the band, we were at the same thing. We were both at the ROTC orientation meetings where they introduced us to the concept of the Reserve Officers Training Corps.
You were saying that both of you were quite involved in the Glee Club, which is a pretty much almost a full-time activity at Notre Dame. How did he demonstrate his commitment to the Glee Club?
Well, I said that, Jim was a born leader. Junior year really was the kind of a turning point, for all of us actually, probably, because during junior year, Jim was elected president of the Glee Club for our senior year. And Jim and I were both first tenors. We were only 4 of the entering freshman year that made the club. And we wound up standing side by side at our concerts, all of our concerts, our formal concerts. I was on the end, he was next to me. That's the way it was set up, by coincidence. So we were side by side the whole time we were in the Glee Club together. As I said, he was elected president. He took that extremely seriously.
He really demonstrated his leadership qualities by trying to manage the Glee Club while he was in Quantico training as a Marine, which was very brutal, very difficult, but he was still dual tasking and trying to run the Glee Club from boot camp.
He wanted to do everything the best he possibly could.
John, this is 1963 and 1964, kind of at the very start of the Vietnam War. What were Jim's motivations for joining the Marines and possibly going to Vietnam?
As you mentioned, it was very early in the Vietnam War, and his unit was the first unit to be called up to go to Vietnam. He wanted to get his military career done, his 2-year obligation done. I believe he wanted to be a patent attorney. I think he was going to law school when he finished his 2-year active duty.
So you were able to communicate with Jim, who was up by the DMZ. You were down closer to Saigon. And the last time you spoke to him, he said he was going on his vacation, his R&R to Japan. So you thought he was going to be safe for a bit. But what was the next thing?
After Jim was lost, his company commander called me on that same radio phone connection that we had, and to tell me that Jim was lost the day before on an ambush, taking a platoon out. And I thought he was telling me, I thought he was talking about somebody else, because I thought Jim was on his way to Japan. And I told him that. And that's when he shared with me that he had gotten there and they were short a platoon leader. Jim heard about it and he volunteered to take the unit out, a reconnaissance unit out, and put off his R&R. And I heard that, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it because that's Jim. I mean, that's just like Jim Egan, but that's what he did. He volunteered to take this unit out, whereas he could have gotten out of a chopper and gotten out of there for a brief respite and then come back later.
John, how do you maintain his legacy every day? What legacy, what portion of Jim do you still carry with you?
A lot. My wife and I named our son after him, James Thomas Lally. He's named after Jim Egan. He was born in 1967, and we didn't think of it as a memorial then because he was MIA POW. We were thinking that there was a chance that he'd be found. Even by that time, there were others being released, but it truly was a memorial. I still wear his bracelet much as I can.
Do you think his legacy lives on and what he stood for still burns bright?
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you a wonderful thing. In 2004, a lot of our classmates kind of organized his hometown. I was in his house in his hometown in Mountainside many times. They named the street Egan Court, and after Jim, and a proclamation, to remember Jim Egan, the hometown boy, that his life was cut way, way too short. Jim's birthday is May 31st. Yeah. He was born on Memorial Day. And this year, Memorial Day is May 31st.
Well, John, this being our Memorial Day tribute, and this is also Jim's birthday this year, Memorial Day, the 31st of May. So thank you for making this memorial tribute for all of the fallen classmates at Notre Dame and for your friend, Jim Egan, on his birthday.
Thank you very much. This is a wonderful tribute to Jim and to Notre Dame too.
Kevin Burke, class of '67, was an Army infantry officer. On the night of November 20th, 1968, he volunteered to rescue injured soldiers pinned down by enemy fire. On his second solo attack of the enemy's machine gun position, he was killed in action. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and a Purple Heart for his heroism.
Dennis McCarthy in Traverse City, Michigan. Tell me how you knew Kevin Burke.
I knew Kevin Burke from Notre Dame. I knew him because he lived right across the hall from me in Pangbourne Hall, junior year, in the year of 1966.
And how close were you to him? I mean, did you spend any vacations together or do anything outside of Notre Dame together?
We did. Kevin was a good friend. He came to Northern Michigan, where I live, about 220 miles north of Notre Dame, several times with some other classmates of mine. Being from Anita, Iowa, Kevin was from Anita. He didn't go home that often. So on breaks or holidays, small holidays, he would come north with me periodically.
What was he involved in at Notre Dame? What kind of activities did he get involved in there?
He was involved in a lot of things. He was involved in intramural sports, also in just pickup games, a pickup basketball game or a pickup football game. He was always available. He was just the solid guy from the Midwest that we all loved.
You also mentioned he was a bit of a jokester, a prankster, and an occasional singer.
A lot of the fellows from Notre Dame on the ski team used to go up to Cabrefet, which is a ski area over by Cadillac, Michigan. And so we decided to take an adventure over there that day. And that must have been probably in 66, very snowy conditions. And there was a song at the time called Lou Christie, Lightning Strikes Again. And I can remember Kevin being in the back seat, and the song was high pitched, and Kevin had a high pitched voice, and he sang that lightning strikes again over and over again until we almost had to stop the car and ask him to exit.
Now, you served in ROTC together, I understand.
We did. Yeah, he was very dedicated to the ROTC. He was a patriot. He believed in democracy, believed in the American way. And he took the ROTC very, very seriously. I think it was a motivation for him because of those reasons. And I also think it helped him on his Notre Dame education.
I guess an indication of how serious he was about it was after he got his first assignment in the Army and decided to transfer.
He did. I can almost remember that day exactly. I was in the hallway at Pangbourne talking to him, and I knew he had been his MOS, which was military occupational specialty, if I remember, was transportation. And he thought about it, and the war was very active at the time, and he wanted to help fight communism. And so he asked the colonel at Notre Dame if he could be transferred into infantry.
Did you have any correspondence with him while he was in Vietnam?
I did not. I didn't hear from him until his mother called me about his death. Because Mike, that was only probably a year and a half. He was killed about a year and a half after he graduated Notre Dame.
And he wasn't the only casualty from your ROTC class, was he?
No, we had several casualties. We remembered them at our 50th reunion, which was 2 or 3 years ago at Notre Dame, just prior to COVID. Pat Dixon was another close friend of ours from Dixon, Illinois, who was also killed about the same time Kevin was.
When you see that picture of Kevin Burke and Pat Dixon standing together in their ROTC uniforms, what memories does that bring back?
Well, it just brings back memories of two great young men whose lives were cut very short by the situation we were in back then. But he was basically a hero. As you know, the commendations on the 3 medals he got, which were the Distinguished Cross, the Purple Heart, and the Bronze Star. I mean, he volunteered for that operation to go back and save some wounded personnel, and did save 2 people. And then he went back again for the 3rd person that was injured, and that's when he was shot by a sniper. So,
does that type of courage and heroism surprise you, knowing him the way you knew him?
Not really. Like I mentioned before, he was a solid Midwestern guy. I mean, he's the one. If you had a team, if you were in the military, he would certainly be the one that you'd want on your team, and he was a leader.
On past Memorial Days and this Memorial Day, Do you think of Kevin?
I think of Kevin a lot. Yeah, I really do. I think of him every day because of the life I've gotten to lead and the business I'm in and the family I have. And, you know, I'm saddened by the fact that he didn't have that opportunity.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on your friend Kevin Burke.
You're welcome, Mike.
Richard Dick Morrissey, class of 62, served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam as a Marine aviator. Having survived a mid-air explosion in 1965, his F-4 Phantom disappeared August 19, 1969, into the South China Sea near Da Nang, and he was declared killed in action.
Dennis Rutowski, you were in Naval ROTC with Dick Morrissey. Tell us about it. Well, how did you guys first connect?
Well, we first connected on the drill floor at the Navy Drill Hall, a building that is no longer at Notre Dame. And we came together because I was on the drill team, the Navy ROTC drill team, and Dick wanted to join the drill team. He was a year behind me, so I already had a year experience there, but he had so much more that he really stood out amongst the regular college students that were on the drill team. And that was in, yes, and that was in September of 1958.
How did he get all this experience? You say he wasn't just your average midshipman in Naval ROTC. He had previously enlisted in the military?
Yes, he told me that when he got out of high school in 57, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. And he went to Parris Island in South Carolina, the Marine Corps boot camp, and was there for several months. And at some point along the line, the Marine Corps identified him as a potential candidate for NROTC. And they sent him to the Naval Academy to NROTC prep school, after which in the summer of 58, he transferred to Notre Dame, essentially.
You guys were on campus 1958. Did anyone even know or speak of Vietnam at that point?
No, we really didn't. I mean, the military people certainly did not. I think there was something with a Notre Dame doctor who was sending reports back from Vietnam because they had a lot of problems after the Indochina War in 1954.
Dr. Tom Dooley.
Yes, that was it.
I remember
But
there
that
was
was yeah, those were the only mentionings that I can remember of Vietnam at the time.
After Dick left and both of you left Notre Dame, how soon thereafter was he in Vietnam?
1965. Yes, he was flying out of Da Nang for his first tour with the 1st Marine Air Wing. And I understand that coming back from a run, which his plane could not continue because of ordnance problems, a bomb or something on the plane exploded. As a result, he and the pilot bailed out over South Vietnam. And the plane, of course, went down. And then Dick and the pilot got together, and there were some Vietnamese or Viet Cong or North Vietnamese soldiers in the area. And Dick called in close air support to protect him and the pilot until a rescue flight had gotten there. During this instance, Dick received wounds and ultimately was awarded a Purple Heart and a combat action ribbon for the incident. But he and the pilot were then rescued.
And then Dick goes back to Vietnam on another tour of duty, flying in Phantom F-4s. And what happened the second time?
So he ended up going back to Vietnam in the middle of '69. And about 2 or 3 months after that was when he was killed. Bachelor, when I first met him, I understand he got married right after graduation in '62, just a couple of days after graduation. I did hear the story about the fact that at his wedding he cut the cake. He was in uniform at his wedding. He cut the cake with his sword, and not thinking, he put the sword back in the scabbard. And a couple of years later, he pulled the sword out, and guess what? The wedding cake is still in there. So
You wouldn't think that from the commander of the drill team, that he wouldn't have cleaned his sword before putting it back in the scabbard. There's an inscription at the Basilica door. It says, "God, Country, Notre Dame." Do you think Dick really represented that?
yes, sir. You know, and I've thought exactly of those three words. I mean, he was a good man, right? He gave his life for his country, and he was a good Irishman. I mean, he had it all, and he fit those words very well.
Dennis, thank you for sharing your thoughts and your memories of your friend, Lieutenant or Captain Dick Morrissey, United States Marine Corps.
Thank you very much for making this memorial for him such an accomplishment. Thank you.
Robert Stork, class of '64, was an Army first lieutenant. While stationed at the Long Bin base near Saigon, he was killed in a rocket attack on April 2, 1969. He earned a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart and was buried near his home in Oakland, California.
John Rahia, unlike the others, you didn't really know Robert Stork except for a chance encounter with him in Vietnam on the last day of his life.
Yes, that's correct. We Long Bin, where we were both stationed, but never had run into one another, is a huge post, probably 50,000 people there. So to get around, you always jumped in a truck. People were always willing to give you a ride. I jumped in a truck, found out Robert was on there, found out he went to Notre Dame. We chatted for probably the 5 or 6 minutes we were in the truck, and we decided that the next night, not that night, but the next night, we would go to the O Club and have a few beers. That night, about 6 or 7 rockets came in. I heard one hit very close because I could hear the shrapnel bounce off my roof. I didn't even have a chance to get into the bunker. I walked, when it was over and the all clear sounded, I walked over to where it sounded like, and there was still some little bit of smoke and debris, and I asked a soldier what happened, and he said, well, a rocket hit a hooch and there was at least one person killed. And then someone else walked up and said, yeah, I heard Robert Stork got killed tonight. It must have literally come right through the roof of his hooch, because the roof was nothing but tin metal. And that was it. That's when he died, right then on the spot.
What were your impressions of Robert during this chance encounter in the back of a truck in Vietnam?
Well, it was pretty brief. He seemed like a typical Notre Dame guy, very friendly, happy to get together later on the next night, talk about Notre Dame, probably talk about a little football, have a few drinks, just to get to know him and know one another. And I think it would have probably been a nice relationship to have had under the circumstances.
John, after that brief encounter in April '69 in Vietnam and the tragic aftermath, has Robert Stork gone out of your mind? It's just part of ancient history, or do you still think about it on occasion?
I think about it from time to time. When I was walking back to Notre Dame with my wife from St. Mary's to go to the game, that was literally in '69. That was probably October of 1969. That's why everything was very fresh. I saw the crosses, I saw his name, and probably said a little prayer for him right then and there. But from that day to this, which has been a long time, every now and then his name comes up, only because I think about it, not because of any friends we have or any connections that we might have.
And how important is that chance encounter with Robert Stork fit into your overall narrative about Vietnam?
It's one of the things that I remember the most, because it never happened. We weren't two ships passing at night. We were two ships passing that didn't know we were passing. We had a chance, but it never developed. I think it would have been really nice if we'd gotten together and gotten to know each other. But it didn't happen.
Well, John, thank you very much for sharing this story about Lieutenant Robert Stork.
You're welcome, Mike. Thank you for doing this too.
Michael Chemo McCormick, class of 68, was a Navy lieutenant. While flying a mission over North Vietnam on January 10, 1973, just weeks before the peace treaty, his A-6 intruder was presumed down by a missile. His remains were not recovered until 2002 and are buried in Arlington National Cemetery.
Tom Gibbs, you were his roommate at Notre Dame. Tell us about your friend Mike McCormick.
Well, Mike and I met freshman year, but didn't really become close friends until junior year when we were living next door to each other in the 4th floor of Baden. And then senior year, we became roommates, kind of combined two rooms.
What kind of guy was Mike? Was he a pretty fun-loving guy?
Mike was the senator for Baden Hall, and very well liked throughout the entire dormitory. So he was he was a happy guy, a fun guy, and a good athlete, played on all the inter-hall teams.
He also said that he was involved in an off-campus extracurricular activity, which really kind of personified what kind of guy he was.
The four of us as seniors became substitute teachers in the South Bend school system. And I think it was probably a good deal for South Bend because they called the room, and they usually one of the four of us could go ahead and take care of that substitute role on that day. So many people knew him as Chemo. He had a strong relationship with Hawaii. His dad had been a captain in the Navy, and then after retirement from the Navy became the harbor master in Honolulu. So Mike had spent a good portion of his life in Hawaii.
And what did he add to your graduation to make it feel a little bit more like home and not?
Well, that's a great story. We were in our graduation robes on a hot June afternoon, and Mike's family arrived with Hawaiian leis for us. I'm probably mispronouncing leis, but the flower arrangement that we put around our necks.
You say that Mike was part of Navy ROTC. 1968, very important time where people were making decisions whether to serve or not to serve. Where do you think that factored into his decision making?
I think Mike, because of his background, because of his father's background in the Navy, I think he felt an obligation to serve.
The sad irony about Mike's story is he died January 1973. For most of us, the war was over. In fact, officially it was over only 2 weeks later. How does that stick in your mind as
well,
sad?
Of course, we didn't know that Mike had died. He was missing in action for quite a long time. They wouldn't. Talking with people in the squadron later years later, they told us, the Notre Dame guys, that they were certain that he had been shot down and was dead, but they didn't want to. If they could continue to have him just missing in action, his widow would receive benefits, widow and child at that time.
Mike flew in an A-6 Intruder, very kind of famous plane during the Vietnam era. And his squadron was a fairly famous squadron. In fact, somewhat immortalized in the film, The Flight of the Intruder. And there is an incident in that film that I understand relates to an actual incident that Mike was involved in.
there's a scene in The Flight of the Intruder where the pilot, the plane has been shot and his navigator's been wounded, and Mike brought the plane in and was able to land it on the deck of the Midway. That was Mike's story.
We're talking about in the series about lives well lived but cut way too short. Does that pretty much describe Mike McCormick?
Mike was the kind of person that was going to be a success in life, no matter what he did, and whether he would have continued on as a pilot, in the Navy or out of the Navy. I don't know. Nobody will ever know. But he was a person that would have been successful. His personality, his brains, and his good nature would have risen high in whatever program or whatever institution he ended up with.
Thank you, Tom Gibbs, for sharing your thoughts on Lieutenant Mike McCormick.
You're welcome, Mike.